طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سعيدة بلقائكم اليوم في اتكاء جديدة في براحة نادي الكتاب، في جلسة إن شاء الله حتكون مختلفة ومتفردة بموضوع مختلف جدا مما تعودنا عليه، وإن شاء الله حنطلع منها بمفتاح يفتح لنا الأبواب المغلقة. حابة وأقول what don't we know and why don't we know it? What keeps ignorance alive or allowed to be used as a political instrument? Agnotology, the study of ignorance, is going to be our subject today for our book club, and it's going for sure to be a great presentation. I'm really very excited to introduce our very special guest today, Mohamed Abdelbagi Ahmed Abdelbagi. Mohamed is a fifth year medical student in Georgia. He was graduated previously from computing science, and he had an experience in marketing for multiple companies, including Ulysses, am I right, Mohammed? Ulysses Neuroscience.
Ulysses Neuroscience, yeah, correct.
Yeah, which work in researching of very rare diseases such as Fragile X syndrome. Mohammed goals and wishes in life to be neurologist, and I'm sure soon we will have a great neurologist called Mohamed Abdelbagi Ahmed Abdelbagi. سعيدين جدا جدا بوجودك معنا محمد، ومتشوقين جدا نستمع للبرزنتيشن بتاعك، فتفضل.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. Thank you, and thank you all for having me.
Sorry for the interruption. Can you open your mic? Is that okay? Your camera?
Oh, my camera, yes, of course.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yeah, once again, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for having me today. So today I'm going to be introducing to you all a topic of agnotology, which is a very under-researched study, a very new field, a very new branch of philosophy. So just like its twin or its opposite, which is epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, agnotology is a very new field, whereas epistemology has been studied for a very, very, very long time. So I'm just going to present my slide now. Hopefully everyone can see it. So the book is written by many authors, but it's mainly edited by Dr. Robert Proctor and by Londa Schiebinger. Those are the two main editors. Can everyone see what I've shared, or?
No, we don't see it.
Oops, 1 second.
So please, Abdullah, ممكن تديه access to share.
Only he could do it. Just go to share.
Yeah, I just need to give my computer permission to let it share. So I've never used Zoom before. I always use Google Meet. There we go.
Yeah.
So everyone can see the main slide on their screen right now.
Yes.
Perfect. So yeah, this is the title of the book, Agnotology. You know, it was published in 2008. The main editors were Robert Proctor and Londa Schiebinger. But like I said, every chapter in this book had its own author and its own contributors to each chapter. But what we're going to discuss today is the topic of ignorance. And before I started reading this book, I had a different notion of what ignorance is all about. Almost like a shadow to what knowledge is, and knowledge being the light, and ignorance being a sort of a gap or a hollow or a vacuum in our realm, whereas just ready to be filled with knowledge. It's opposite, which is epistemology. But this book actually challenges that belief. And while we think of ignorance as just nothingness, it actually it's more of a solid. It's more operational. It actually has function in our lives, and there's many different types of ignorance that Dr. Robert Proctor will, or Professor Robert Proctor, excuse me, will explore. So we'll start off with a quote from a famous American novelist who kind of contributes to this idea, and his quote basically says that everybody gets told to write about what they know. The trouble with us is that at the earlier stages of life, we think we know everything, or to put it more usefully, we're often unaware of the scope and structure of our ignorance. So here's how we introduce agnotology. So what is agnotology? Is the study of culturally induced ignorance or doubt. So particularly the publication of inaccurate or misleading scientific data. So while there is a lot that's epistemology studied at a great deal, but agnotology is not. As a matter of fact, the term agnotology wasn't even coined until 1992 by the very same author of the book, Dr. Robert Proctor, with help of his friend, a historian called Ian Ball. There was many fight back about this term, because most notably from a branch of marine biology, which actually studied jawless fish, which is the study of agnotology. So originally they spelled the word with an A in the middle, but they had a lot of fight back about this, and they had to change it to an O. So now we have the word agnotology. I'll start off with a fact that not many people know, actually, but not many people know that Sudan has the highest number of pyramids in the world. It has twice as many pyramids as Egypt even does. I'm not sure exactly why that's not a well-known fact. I would say, the official explanation for this is maybe the two civil wars between 1956 to 72 and between 1983 to 2005, and which kind of impeded Sudan's tourism industry. So, but I have a different view. I blame Egypt. I think Egypt's marketing is, they've done a really, really good job at sort of suppressing our own marketing. But that's a story for another day.
I will fix it.
Thanks, Kareem. So much of this book is about exploring, the difference between agnotology and epistemology. And like I said, agnotology is the study of ignorance. where it says opposite, epistemology is the study of knowledge. Excuse me, that should say knowledge. So there's these three distinct distinctions of ignorance, which is explored throughout this book by Robert Proctor. So the first distinction is ignorance as a lost realm. The second distinction is, ignorance as a deliberately engineered, and thirdly, ignorance as a strategic ploy. So ignorance in its naive state, this is probably the most common way we think of ignorance. We think of it as something that knowledge grows out of, where we have to fight and overcome this type of ignorance by getting to knowledge. Socrates once famously said that the truly wise are the ones who know that how little they know. When asked in America, when asked, whether humans lived alongside dinosaurs, actually, a good 52% of Americans answered yes. This was a sort of recent study. I'm presuming around 2008. Another famous example is, as we can see in the picture, Ronald Reagan. He said in a very famous televised speech that America was great because it has.
Are you moving slides? We're still on the first one.
Oh, are we now? 1 second, sorry.
So the slides are not moving.
So the slide you guys can see right now says Agnotology, the book title.
Now
It says naive state.
Now it's bigger.
You can see it now.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, perfect. So yeah, another famous example of this type of ignorance is, like I said, President Ronald Reagan once said famously in the televised speech that America was great because he has never known slavery. So we move on to modern times where, technology plays a big part in this type of ignorance. Actually, famously, media analyst Sut Jali in 1991, he made headlines when he found that people were misinformed about the Gulf War in direct proportion to how much TV they had watched about it. So this plays into the misinformation type of ignorance, where when there's a monopoly on information, then you suddenly have a bigger responsibility and a bigger role to play in information and in how information gets to be, and you could possibly play a role in growing of ignorance. Sorry, just please let me know if the slide has changed now.
Sorry, Mohammed. This is Munzer.
Hi,
I was
Munzer.
just gonna. Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, in regards to the Ronald Reagan televised interview, he said America used to be great because it didn't know slavery. Can you expand on that, please? I didn't really get it.
So when we're talking about naive ignorance, this distinct type of ignorance, You know, we're talking about ignorance as a hollow, as naive, as infantile almost. And you know, a famous example of this was you know, President Ronald Reagan, perhaps an example of naive ignorance, saying in a televised speech that America is great because he has never known slavery. Perhaps is a sign of the time. You know, this was back in the 80s when 70s, excuse me, when President Reagan was in office. But yeah, we're going to explore other types of ignorance as we move on through this book. But another example of how technology plays a role in spreading of ignorance is, you know, as famously South Africa's president Thabo Mbeki, during a late night stroll of the internet, he happened upon a website that actually convinced him that HIV and AIDS are not related. You know, he used this view to justify the slowdown of efforts to combat HIV, which had great impact on the health system of South Africa. But you know, this is an example of how ignorance could be very dangerous. You know, the role of information can be, you know, a very dangerous thing. So the second variant of the second
Muhammad,
variant.
slides are not moving.
Okay, sorry, 1 second. No, you can see part 2, select lost realm.
Yeah, we can see it.
Lost racism.
No, lost realm.
Sorry.
Selective choice. Yeah, we
Oh,
can see the
that's
slide
perfect.
now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So so this second variant of ignorance prompts us to ask, you know, who knows not, and why not, and where is their ignorance and why? So this directly challenges our initial assumption that ignorance is a sort of is a vacuum, but as a matter of fact, it's, you know, Dr. Robert Proctor goes on to you know, argue that it is not. It's actually more of a solid or a shifting body, and it travels through time and occupies space. It's encouraged here and it is discouraged here. So this mainly is due to selective choice. We're bombarded with information, you know, especially in the age of explosion of information. You know, suddenly we have to be very selective. I read somewhere recently that a good 5 research papers come out every minute. You know, so we would have to be very, very selective in what we focus on. But that selectivity plays a great deal in the growth of ignorance. So a great example of this is the first transits of the Atlantic and the circumnavigation of Africa by the first European voyagers. You know, the monarchs sent out ships in search of wealth, fortune, and fame, but also knowledge. But not all knowledge flowed back to the peripheries, however. A great example of this was the exclusion of abortive fashions. So abortifacients were, women who knew a great deal about preventing childbirth, but back at the time, this was judged as irrelevant. This idea is actually explored in a big part in this book, but whereas the potato and the quinine, which came from the bark of the cinchonca tree, right, and quinine, is a component of quinolone now, which we use for malaria. These type of products were favored, whereas the peacock flower, which was which had contraceptive properties back in the time, the voyagers chose not to bring that back with them, and that was because the policy back in the time was, Europe needed to grow as a population, and this flower and this knowledge of this flower was going to impede this Europe's effort in growing as a population. So intentionally, the knowledge of the peacock flower was ignored or disposed of in the return of voyagers back to back home. So the knowledge of the peacock flower was not known for generations afterwards, but it still grew as a big part in the culture in Africa still, and in the Caribbean. So that was a big example of selective choice and how it grows ignorance. So the third variant, which is strategic ploy. So this is perhaps the most written about part in the book, actually, which is ignorance that is made, maintained, and manipulated. That's how Professor Proctor defines strategic ploy of a variant of ignorance, and a big part of the idea of why Professor Proctor came to study agnotology in the first place was his study of big tobacco and their ploys and their and their strategies in maintaining the industry alive. But mainly I'll start with trade secrets, and we move on to how big tobacco came to survive, through manipulating ignorance. So science and trade are said to be often forced open, but secrecy plays an important part in both realms. So research and development is pursued under the cloak of privacy to maintain business advantage. What Coca-Cola are going to discover in their research and development cannot be known by their competitors. Otherwise, they're going to have a business advantage. Actually, Coca-Cola is a big example of this because only 3 to 4 people in the world know the Coca-Cola recipe, which is locked away in the vault in Atlanta. And that's the same can be said for KFC, which recipe is locked away somewhere in Louisville. So scientific secrecy is, in some cases, is necessary, but it can also be detrimental. So, for example, alchemy and astrology were practiced in the dark because they were seen as sort of occult sciences. But during the so-called scientific revolution, much of the effort of the scientific revolution was actually to eliminating secrecy. and to open up these practices, and as such shine a light on darkness. And when you shine a light on alchemy, it becomes chemistry, and when you shine a light on astrology, it becomes astrophysics. A famous internal memo actually by Brown and Williamson Tobacco Company said that doubt is our product. So it wasn't cigarettes that was the product, it was doubt. Doubt is how they kept the industry alive. So why don't we know what we don't know? The simple answer is steps were taken to keep us in the dark, and no one has done it more efficiently than big tobacco. So the tobacco industry pretty early on recognized that health fears were, they were an impediment to the market, and this is why, for example, as we can see in this picture, L&M filters were marketed as just what the doctor ordered. As you can imagine, there wasn't a lot of regulation back in the 50s against advertising for cigarettes, and there wasn't a lot of research done on the effects of tobacco, which a big part of that was big tobacco's own efforts in actually instilling doubt. So every time a research or a scientific paper was published, proving the effects of tobacco on our health, even when they were directly linked to cancer, big tobacco played a big part in putting doubt and delaying research even further. Famously once, first time they linked cancer from tobacco in mice, big tobacco argued that in the tobacco there was mouse carcinogens that were not going to affect humans, and they argued that you're not going to experiment on humans because that's what Nazis do. So that's just examples of how big tobacco remained as an industry, but what they came to find out pretty quick is that you can't just keep denying science, right? So they had to move on to more subtle ways, more subtle ploys to keep the industry alive. And so they've done that basically by advertising cigarettes as being for the youth, being for the rebellious, being for the liberal, being for the beautiful. So that was a more subtle way. So that's how they kept it alive. They actually aligned smoking with free speech, back in the 80s. So eventually big tobacco had to give up in all these ploys, and they had to actually start to play in the scientific fields themselves. And they started campaigns questioning labs, inciting, animal models that mimic humans. And they argued that you cannot successfully, mimic research in animals of tobaccos with that of humans because they're completely different species. The point of all of this basically was to delay research and create reasonable doubt, and as such the industry survives. Nowadays, obviously, there is cigarettes ads are completely banned from our TVs and from the internet. So military secrecy is another example of strategic, the strategic ploy ignorance. A big example of this was, Oppenheimer, the Manhattan Project, which was set which set the stage for much of America's post-war secret research. For example, the existence of plutonium was classified for several years after its discovery. So, for example, the words radiation and radioisotope weren't even published in the first 200 articles about the atomic bomb. And while that played a role, which is understandable because America is at war with, at the time with Russia, the Great Cold War, even in World War II. So you had to keep a lot of, you have to keep your research in the military a secret. And $2 billion went into the Manhattan Project, and much of that was, into classification and keeping publications a secret. Well, that's understandable. It had an impact on other areas as well. Like, for example, did you know that the seafloor stripes were discovered during World War II? The seafloor stripes actually, proved continental drift and improved the existence of the magnetic fields. These were discovered by submarines during World War II, but because of military secrecy, knowledge of these stripes were classified all the way up until the 50s. So, greatly delaying research into magnetic fields and seafloor stripes. Is a famous quote by Mark Twain. He said, "All you need is ignorance and confidence, and success is sure." So the last part of the book goes into secrecy, selection, and suppression. This type of ignorance. So a big part of this is manufactured uncertainty. So this is a child here that we see with Reyes syndrome. I'm sure a lot of the doctors in here recognize this syndrome, which is thankfully a very rare disease since 1986. This disease is a side effect of giving aspirin to children. But since 1986, every bottle of aspirin now comes with a mandatory warning about giving it to children. Sadly, however, in 1980 alone, a substantial 550 cases of Reyes syndrome died in the US. And this was, between 1980 to 1986, there was a big push, for the FDA to put that mandatory warning. But obviously the manufacturers argued in court, argued with the FDA that their research was flawed in 17 different ways, and it cost countless of lives. But this is a type of ignorance, is manufactured uncertainty, which can be used in dangerous ways. Lost knowledge and lost worlds. So we spoke about abortive fashions before in the making of ignorance. So the history of the peacock flower is a very big example that's explored throughout this book of the type of lost ignorance and lost knowledge, and since Columbus's voyage, there has always been a search for Europe by the Europeans for wealth and knowledge in the far-fetched parts of the world. And so a great example of this is the lost history of the Caribbean abortive fashions. So a big part of why the Marian flower or the peacock flower was not so research is because of the policy at the time, the state policy, and being that Europe needed to grow in population, so this flower need not make its way back home. So this demonstrates the lost knowledge variant of agnotology. So what have we learned about ignorance? Well, we learned that there are many types of ignorance. So we discovered that ignorance is not just a hollow space, it's an entity. It occupies a sort of space in our paradigm. You know, knowledge is a big subject, but ignorance is an even bigger one. Stuart Feinstein actually had another interesting intake on ignorance. And not only do we have different types of ignorance, but ignorance is also differ in quality. So, and in fact, knowledge does not follow ignorance. But what's true is the other way around. So Bernard Shaw tells us, you know, Bernard Shaw, for example, to quote, says that science is always wrong. It never solves a problem without creating 10 more. So, you know, we always think of of ignorance, you know, coming before knowledge, almost like a light being shined through a shadow. But they argue that this is actually not the case. You know, with more knowledge actually comes more questions, and with more knowledge, actually more knowledge leads to more high quality questions, which has a big way of sort of explaining. We could kind of explain that through this graph here. So if you can see on the y-axis, you know, this is how much we know, going from a little to a lot, and what you know about it, going from nothing to everything. And as you can see, an undergrad knows a great lot but knows very little about it. Whereas a master's student knows, you know, he doesn't know as much things as an undergrad, but he knows more about fewer things. You know, he's getting more specialized, and he's getting to know, you know, he's getting more specialized in his field. And then a PhD student knows a great lot about almost nothing. And when we change the y-axis label, we can really get a great you know, a great picture of what high quality versus low quality ignorance is all about. So rather than asking, you know, rather than talking about how much you know about a subject, it's what kind of questions can you ask about it. So a PhD student is going to ask a much greater question, a much more sophisticated question about a particular topic that an undergrad is going to ask. And I'll leave you guys with a great quote by Confucius, which says that real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you for coming, taking time, spending time with us, effort, and prepare and present this very, very complicated subject. Really, we appreciate you having you here between us. It's a pleasure to have you to listen to what you have presented. It's really very complicated. Till now, I couldn't get it. Is it a good thing to be ignorant or a bad thing? I couldn't get it really. It seemed to me, you know, a very, very complicated thing. And as a conclusion, what is your recommendation by, having all this subject in detail, to know or not to know? So, I mean, I lost in the middle. I couldn't get it, really. So I don't know. You are encouraging people to be ignorant, or we have to have the knowledge and then try to dig around that knowledge, what we know. It's really complicated.
That's a very good question. That's a very good question. Thank you. Thank you so much for also having me on. So I don't think the point of the book is to, for example, encourage ignorance. What it encourages is to look at ignorance in a different light, and perhaps we can use knowledge. We can use ignorance, to our better understanding of knowledge. So, towards the end of the presentation, I was exploring how there's a difference in high quality ignorance versus low quality ignorance, right? And I demonstrated that by showing, what an undergrad, like for example, myself, I know I know a lot of different, aspects of anatomy, for example, or histology or physiology. I know a lot about a lot of different things within different topics, but a PhD student would be able to explain to me specific type of things in physiology that for the life of me, it's going to take me years to learn. And the difference here is the difference in ignorance. My ignorance is a low quality ignorance versus his ignorance, which is a high quality ignorance. So whereas he might not know as many great deal of different topics as I would, he knows a lot better about very specific details that I'm yet to reach. So ignorance is not particularly we think of ignorance as just being a bad thing, and I argue not. I argue that ignorance actually is it should be studied, and it should be used in our pursuit of knowledge.
So I can say it is kind of specialization of the knowledge itself. So everyone has a specialized knowledge in one part or in one subject, and the other has his specialty in the other, while most of the people, they have a general knowledge, as you said, with a very low level.
Yeah. Low quality of ignorance.
Low
exactly
quality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, this I can say العرب زمان في كان do you understand Arabic?
I can, yeah. I won't be able to reply in Arabic, but I can understand
Okay,
you very
I will
well.
try and I will try to translate what I'm saying.
Okay.
Okay, there is Al-Khalil ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, an Arabic guy, long time ago. He divided the people as 4 groups. And in his saying, he said it as a rajul. All the Arabic people, a rajul, the man, is everything at that time, right? So he said, so as I said, he divided them into 4 groups. So he said the first group, رجل يدري إنه يدري فذلك العالم فاسألوه, which means the first group, they know and they know that they know, or that guy, he knows and he knows that he knows. So this is the scientist, so you can go and ask him. This is the first group. So they know and they know that they know. The second group, رجل يدري ولا يدري أنه يدري فهذا ناسي فذكروه, which means he knows but he doesn't know that he knows. So this guy, just he forgot he knows, just go and remind him that he knows. This is the second group. The third group, he said, someone doesn't know. يعني بالعربي رجل لا يدري ويدري أنه لا يدري. فذلك الجاهل فعلموه, which means he doesn't know and he knows that he doesn't know. And this is the ignorant one, so just go and teach him. This is the third group. The fourth one, رجل لا يدري ولا يدري أنه لا يدري فذاك الأحمق فاجتنبوه, which means he doesn't know and he doesn't know that he doesn't know. So this is the idiot one, and just, avoid him.
Right.
So these are the very old classification of people. So based on what you said, that means there is a fifth one, right? So a fifth one, which I can say, those who intentionally ignorant, maybe because of the knowledge they got, or maybe because, as they said, could be political reasons, or so that they keep them on that spot of being ignorant.
Yeah.
Or what do you think?
Yeah. So that's four very interesting groups that you gave me, actually, and it actually goes very. It's a good example of what I was trying to explain earlier. So we could actually put those four people in sort of like a spectrum. So the person who doesn't know, and he also doesn't know that they know, right? I'm going to put on the very low quality ignorance, right? And the person who knows, and he also knows what he doesn't know. That's the person that I would put on the very high, high spectrum of ignorance. But this book, before I started this book, I always thought of ignorance as sort of just a hollowness, just almost like an emptiness, whereas knowledge is sort of the solid that occupies it. Whereas this book actually, it explores the idea that it is not actually, like, for example, like you mentioned, knowledge, ignorance can be manipulated, and it can be used to sort of manipulate the masses, for example. And Dr. Proctor, goes on to explain that this is a type of ignorance, which is the strategic ploy ignorance. And a big example of that was big tobacco. We saw how, for example, big tobacco played several different parts in kind of keeping the industry alive, and they've done that through creating ignorance, and they've done that through manipulation, and they've done that through intentional what's the word I'm trying to think of, this intentional, like, ignoring of science and ignoring of specific facts. They ignored how cancer was, for example, successfully produced in mice with tobacco. A big part of that is what kept the tobacco industry alive. But yeah, like I said, Professor Proctor really challenges the way we think about ignorance.
Last question, Mohammed, before I open the floor.
Sure.
I noted that you have a great interest in that subject. So just wondering how you got involved in that, and what brought you to be in the middle of these very complicated kind of things. So you studied medicine, you studied computer science, so now you are in the middle of, I can say, sociology. This is kind of sociology, right? So
yeah,
Yeah, what is the driving, factor that brought you to that end?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So, just like my dad, actually, my dad was present in this in this talk right now. Me and my dad both have a very great interest in philosophy as a whole. So from a very young age, I tried to study the great philosophers like Socrates. As difficult as reads as they were, I was very fascinated by how these great philosophers thought and how they impacted our world. But epistemology and the study of knowledge is a massive field. But then I thought, not a great deal is studied on what we don't know rather than what we do know. So when I picked up this book, I found it a sort of very interesting, very untouched field. And I thought, this might be an interesting discussion to have, and hopefully it was.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. It was really a very interesting discussion and a very interesting subject. So I will open the floor. We have Sakina. Prof. Sakina, تفضلي.
أهلين. excellent job يا دكتور محمد.
شكرا.
التوبيك بتاع الإغنورانس. I was more intrigued about the definition and how the whole thesis of the book and the writer والدiscussion بتاعك إنه الإغنورانس هو in a way is ignoring the facts. Just taking the examples of the tobacco and what the tobacco company, I mean, they know these are facts, they know these are scientific findings, but the intention is to cover it and to ignore it. Mm-hmm. So that's so there is the ignorance where, so in that sense, ignorance is defined as there is a knowledge, but people are ignoring it. So yeah. It's not necessary that these the people who are running these tobacco companies, they don't know the facts. They're not ignorant, but they're finding the ignorance intentionally to serve their purpose. I want to speak a little bit about the role of social media now for propagating the ignorance. Just taking the example of what's going in Sudan, I mean, for the last couple of years, politically, geopolitically, everything is happening now. You see lots of stories. Lots of it is not documented. It's not documented. It's not true. So this is what I call ignorance. So you feel the whole internet or the social media forums with lots of stories that half of it or more than half is not correct. This incorrect information is propagated. So this is what I can define as ignorance, because when you're propagating wrong information or unsubstantiated information, you are propagating ignorance. So, but again, if you go on the other hand, if you want to challenge in this age, I don't think anybody can doubt the information or the facts. You can Google anything. You can Google anybody. So people can put whatever they want to put in one forum or another, but you can always fact check. And now, in addition to Google, you can do the chat GPT, and there is nothing that you cannot find. So I just want you to elaborate a little bit on this and just your opinion and what's your views. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's very.
Mohammed, just I can take another one and then I will give you the chance. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Sure.
اوكي شذا زهر تفضلي. شذا. okay, iPhone.
Yeah, I need to unmute. Sorry about that. Thank you for your time and presentation, and thank you, Dr. Anoha, for presenting elegantly. I love the way you present the subject, although it's an old book. And thank you to Dr. Professor Sakina for pointing the important role of social media. Actually, at the time I think the book came out, it did not highlight the impact that social media have on spreading this ignorance, because it became the arm, the effective arm, like Professor Sakina presented, to spread lies and ignorance and fake news, to the extent that it became a weapon of war. There is 2 or 3 books that I come across, which specifically highlight this. There's one called Like War. It speak specifically to the phenomenon of using social media to spread ignorance, and how does impact the last election of Donald Trump and all that controversy between Russia and US. That was a big deal. All goes back to the root of what you're talking about. I think you also eloquently talk about how it used to be used in marketing as a marketing tool, you know, to bypass products in terms of people unaware of the impact or the what they doing to themselves. But I also think the role of social media is very important. That's one comment I have. And if your time allow, I'll just add one more. Early in your presentation, you point that Sudan has multiple number of pyramids, more than what Egypt have, right? That's a truth. And you put the blame, that was like interesting to me. You put the blame on Egypt marketing, not highlighting that Sudan has more pyramids. I don't think from a standpoint of taking personal responsibility, that's a problem of Egypt. That's not the problem of Egypt. That's the problem of Sudanese not being able to present their civilization. Not only that, I don't know if you study in Sudan or not. If you look at the Sudanese curriculum, it doesn't even mention that anywhere. So to me, in my theory, and I don't have much to back it, but that's my belief from my own reading and research. The Sudanese civilization, although it used to be a beacon one day, has went down not because of the Egyptian, it's actually because of the destruction of the Ethiopian. And this has had nothing to do with that dam. The Ethiopian has invaded Sudan and finished the kingdom of Marawi around 350 PC. They destroyed that civilization, and that has resulted in what you call qati'a ma'rafiyya. So since that time, Sudanese don't know they the one who actually, because of their effort, Pythagoras came to Sudan, or they used to call it South Egypt, to learn mathematics, and that's how Black Athens came out. All that is hidden from the general. If you take a common Sudanese today, they don't know that, and it is nowhere. And even if you said it now, it look far-fetched. That's, yeah, one day. It's actually even the Masonic started from Sudan, and nobody even could relate that to that. And a lot of, civilizations advantages took place at that time, and still that's nowhere to be written. So I find it not fair to blame Egypt for that, because if you don't stand for yourself, you don't expect other people to market for you. I don't think Mercedes wait for BMW to market for them. That's just not the way it is. So thank you for this elegant presentation, and I hope I expressed what I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
شكرا يا شذا، شكرا لك. تفضل محمد.
Thank you very much for both questions, very interesting questions. So I'll start by addressing Dr. Sakina's question. When she asked about social media and its role, and role of the growth of ignorance. But this actually, your example perfectly demonstrates how ignorance is a sort of it's a sort of an entity that can be used to manipulate, and whereas in the past we kind of see it as a sort of as a passive shadow. This is what this book is really about. It's about exploring the importance of ignorance, and it plays a big part in our paradigm and in our lives. And social media plays a big part in that. I mean, we can see in the explosion of the information age, we actually have more access to information now that we have ever had in the history of humanity. I cited earlier that a good 5 research papers are published per minute. So every minute I'm talking, 5 research papers are published as we speak. So how can we keep up with that? There's almost a sort of explosion of this explosion of knowledge is almost overwhelming in our selective minds. And social media's role and its power is that with sensationalism and with sort of how do you grab the people's attention, and it's through sensationalism. And if you can sensationalize facts, or quote unquote facts, that's how you grab attention. That's how you grow ignorance. So I can see, for example, right now there's a lot of third-party companies growing at the moment where they independently look at every article that is published on social media. So anytime something is published, for example, on COVID-19, we can see right underneath the post, COVID-19, then it will link to an article. We have never seen that before until the 2016 elections, because only then big social media companies realized the impact of social media and its role in information and in the growth of ignorance. And perhaps that plays a big part in the war in Sudan at the moment as well. So it's a very interesting discussion to have as well. As far as the comment on Sudan, I was merely playing to the Egyptian audience in the room right now. But you're right, Dr. Shez. I think a more responsible way to look at the history of Sudan and sort of the lost history and the lost knowledge is by looking inwards and sort of looking at why the whole world doesn't know that Sudan has the most pyramids in the world. We need to look at that, and we start inwards. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you. iPhone.
I'm
has a
actually.
question. Okay.
Hi.
معلش
yeah.
عرفنا بنفسك
Yeah, so
لو
my
سمحت.
question was about.
ممكن تعرفنا بنفسك لو سمحت.
Sorry, can you hear me
عشان-
better now?
Just
He doesn't speak Arabic. Sorry.
Oh,
Can
okay,
you let us
So can you
know who you
introduce
are?
yourself, because there is no name, it's just an iPhone.
Oh, so this is Monzia's iPhone. I'm Ash, one of his friends.
Oh, okay, hi.
Hi. My question was more about more personally, like what kind of insights have you sort of taken from this book, and like personally in your own personal life, what would you say you've sort of implemented from this book?
That's a very good question, Ash. So I look at the you know, before I started this book, I had a very different idea of what ignorance actually is, and I think a good way of we can kind of use this book in our very lives is to kind of sort of look at ignorance in a different light. And for example, when I'm studying right now I'm doing a rotation in neuroscience, for example, and you know, I look at high quality ignorance versus low quality ignorance. And you know, when I'm going in, you know, I just started this week this topic, so I would say my ignorance quality right now is very low, and by the end of it, hopefully it will be very high. So rather than looking at what my knowledge is on the subject, I should ask myself what I don't know about a specific topic. So so I'd say we should pay more focus on our ignorance and how we could sort of you know, use that to better focus on sort of filling the knowledge gap in our lives. But thank you very much for that question.
Thank you, Mohammed. Karim?
Yeah, thanks very much for presenting, Mo. It's very insightful. I just have a quick question I wanted to pick your brain on. So I want to understand from your own personal opinion, how do you think agnotology interacts with cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance? So understanding more about the psychological factors.
Sorry, can you please repeat that again, Karim?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to understand a bit more about what you think about how agnotology interacts with cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance.
Right. That's a very interesting question. Unfortunately, I'll admit, guys, I am not an expert on agnotology. You know, I've read this topic and hope to understand as much of it as I possibly can. But I think what your question could possibly mean is sort of how our own ignorance plays a part in our bias, if that's what you mean, and in what we choose to focus on and what we choose to ignore. And I kind of explored that in Dr. Sakina's question, right? So and also in the presentation. So there was a, you know, a type of ignorance was lost knowledge and a selective selective choice in our focus, and our minds are sort of like predatory in what we choose to focus on and what we choose to not focus on, and they have and it has to be, because you know, we live in a vast sea of knowledge right now, and it's impossible to focus on everything, and what we choose to focus on you know, is down to our discipline, and you know, and social media companies, for example, play a big part in manipulating that. But I hope that answers your question. I wasn't 100% sure what your question meant, but thank you for your question.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks
you.
very much, Mo.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take Haytham.
Hello, Haytham here. So Mohammed, a very good talk overall. I wanted to ask about, you know, referring back to social media and how our attention spans have shortened due to, you know, this new introduction of reels, and how people due to seek, you know, confirmation via very bite-sized short space of information, like via a short video or whatever. So do you think that the way we obtain information is hindered by the use of social media, and that plays into our ignorance even more? because our attention spans are shortening due to the fact of how, nowadays social media is being used and the public view it.
Yeah, 100%. So, like I mentioned before, right? In the age of explosion of information, our very selective minds, if undisciplined, can be very easily manipulated. And social media companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, they've become very good at sort of knowing the exact buttons to push in our dopamine response system, and and as such, they're able to grab our attention, and if unregulated, it's a very dangerous thing. So, how selective we are with information, that's something that we're gonna have to very closely look at. But that's another way basically that ignorance can grow, is through the manipulation of information. And but yeah, thank you very much for your interesting question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mo.
حنان. تفضل يا حنان.
السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
يا نهى, you were really perfect. And Ibn Mohamed Abdelbagi, you've done a great job, son. And you are so humbled, and you are full of information. And so actually, I didn't. I'm inserting some Arabic words, but I'll try my best.
Sure. You can speak Arabic. That's no problem.
Right.
Like I said, I can understand, but I might reply in English.
So the book is so rich with information and knowledge, and it tackles a really very important subject. And really summarize how government, institutes, or groups intentionally or strategically try to manipulate ignorance. And sometimes this is intentionally or unintentional. So it creates some sort of uncertainty when we're in that situation. I think from reading, looking, tobacco companies come at the top of the manipulative company and strategically trying to succeed since 1950s, and I didn't know that it started that early, to fight and try to prevail in the environment with the scientists, to the extent that they have their own scientists to counteract, the science. And some area, and I didn't understand it, I didn't match it with any of the events he tried to describe, that sometimes ignorance is not a bad thing. So I didn't know where. Maybe you could direct me and show me where exactly that could be. The statement of ignorance is not a bad thing.
Yep.
I just want to talk about a point that Sakina mentioned, that information is available in the social media everywhere. For example, Google search. And actually, this is the source of the problem, because when you go to Google search, searching for a specific topic, you could find one statement, another topic, antagonizing it immediately. So, and that's part of the manipulation, that some people, there is facts there, and some people trying to manipulate it. So even for Google search, you won't find the truth. Something at the end, I think, of the book, a journalist, and I don't remember the name, they said that journalism has failed tremendously in fighting ignorance because of lack of good standard or good monitor to produce and to educate the public. But I think he came to the conclusion that what's called investigative journalism could be the solution, because investigative journalism, like we see in some programs in the CNN or in some of the famous newspapers, they really do thorough research and bring it out to the public, a sort of educating them. So I think this is good. I'm sorry, my ideas are scattered everywhere, but I'm trying.
That's okay. I'll try to write down your points.
Yes. Something Dave, I've noticed that I moved to America. By the way, your father said you are from Georgia. Is it Georgia in Europe or Georgia here in America?
No, I'm in Georgia in Europe, but one of my hopes is to actually sit the USMLE next year. So I will be joining you guys in the US very soon, inshallah.
Yeah. So America. So the point I wanted to say, yes, the political environment here in America, okay, and I want to pick on the Palestine-Israeli conflict. You will never ever find any social or media talking about this conflict fairly and justly. Never ever. So that's actually part of the manipulation. It's making me furious, actually, because we are in a country, saying, yeah, they are pro, freedom, democracy, and you see, terrible stuff happening there. But nobody dare to talk about this conflict fairly and justly. And even people who dare to talk about it, they will suffer consequences, horrible consequences. I know one of the professors in Yale University has lost his job because he was honest, and he's a Jewish professor. So, or one actually lady, she came and spoke into in the CNN in one of the programs and said, why we were scared to talk about this topic. We have to be really loud and point out the atrocities committed by the Israeli. She lost her job. So this is the reality we are living in. So thank you so much. I don't want to be, and we have lovely time with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you very much. تفضل محمد قبل ما ناخذ عبد الله.
Thank you so much for the interesting question. Well, interesting questions, and I'm going to try to address each one if I can. Hopefully I can manage for you. So you started off by asking me to give examples of how ignorance is good. And from reading Dr. Proctor, he gives us two good examples of this. Ignorance, for example, for one, can be an indicator of where knowledge isn't. And when we study our ignorance of a certain topic, we can understand where there is gaps and where there is need for further research. So knowledge should not ignorance should not go ignored in our efforts to understand the world better. But in other ways, for example, a big part of the book goes on to virtuous ignorance. And for example, you will never find a magazine that's going to publish the exact formula for how to make HIV airborne, for example. And why is that? Because of as a social contract we have with the world, we understand that that's not that's perhaps ignorance that should be preserved. So that is sort of the idea of how ignorance is not always a bad thing. And you go on to mention how Google sites, they give you conflicting reports, and I'd argue that's not only down to manipulation. Manipulation could be, an aspect of this, but it could also be down to, Google is an open source, and specific topics are studied by many different peoples around the world. So when you're looking up a specific topic or a specific, news, for example, it has different sources. So it has different points of view, different angles. So it could not be down specifically just down to manipulation. But you're right, it is an important part to look at. Journalism, back in the 19th, everyone who's a lot older than me, would argue that journalism used to be the way you explain. It used to be investigative. It used to be down to cold hard facts. But what I argue is that it's sensationalism, and that plays a big part into a big chapter in this book, which is selective choice in our focus, and how we get to how our minds focus on different things. That's down to what it chooses to focus on. And but when you can play with the dopamine response circuit of our minds, using sensationalism, then that's how you spread false information, and bad journalism pays is basically what I'm trying to imply, because that's how you get attention. Nobody's going to read a big article explaining, example, the budget in Atlanta, of how they're going to spend it on the city. They're going to read about what Donald Trump said in the news last week about African people, for example. Yeah, because sensationalism is what largely grabs our attention. But there is, like I mentioned before, there is independent parties right now, like, for example, Project Veritas. I'm not sure if you guys heard of Project Veritas, but it's a very new third party which is just started recently. And what they do is they independently verify every news article that comes out, and they do it, and it's very, very difficult to get employed by them, because you need to show very low bias. So entities like that give you sort of hope for the future. But I hope that answered all your points, and thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. Thank you, Hanan. Abdullah, تفضل.
السلام عليكم. Thank you, Mohammed. شكرا جزيلا. Excellent presentation. وشكرا على وجودك هنا. I have a question. Is ignorance is, you define ignorance, you basically, from what I understand from your talk, into two major categories: absence of knowledge and manufactured ignorance. So is agnotology includes under the umbrella absence of knowledge or not? This is the first question. Or it's just the culturally manufactured ignorance? Then the other thing is the culturally manufactured ignorance. I see into two categories, basically. One of them is inflicted by other on you, misinformation, holding information, and others. And the other type is self-inflicted by cognitive biases, confirmation bias, self-interest bias, and all of the other cognitive dissidence, and all of that. Ignorance, the connotation from the word ignorance is innocence. Don't you see a problem lumping up all of that? For example, deceiving, misleading. These are crimes. Some of them are crimes. The other thing is when you said they asked the American, and 50% of them said human lived during the dinosaur era. And I see that a lot here. You could ask somebody who's doing great. He deal with he have a skills, great skills, problem solving. He deals with his environment very well, and he's very competent in what he's doing and living and everything. And you'll ask him about the capital of England. He might not know it. So my question is all information important? I mean, what we don't know is vast. And also the third point, when you mentioned that a PhD will know in depth about one subject, his subject, and know how to ask critically important questions. And an undergraduate will know literature, biology, engineering, a little bit of that, and a little bit of this. So is ignorance really lack of knowledge or misinformation, or is it about the skill to obtain and process this information? Thank you very much for the topic. I'm definitely going to do more reading about it. Thank you.
شكرا. تفضل محمد. Mohamed, can you give me a chance? I will invite Dr. Sakina. She raised her hand. Do you have anything, Dr. Sakina, to add?
أنا الغريبة, the last part of Abdullah's questions has a whole lot to do with my question. And my question is, how are we, so the flip side of ignorance is to create a generation where they seek knowledge. So they seek knowledge, so they're not ignorant, because the knowledge is there. So it's not, although we're still creating new knowledge, but the majority of the knowledge is already there. So, for example, an education system, where we got our primary grade education in Sudan, or in this country or in Europe, it tends to put the kids learning in matter of feeding, so that students learn how to memorize. That's what we did from elementary school, middle school, high school, even in university. We memorize the subject, we go to the exam, we spit it, we get our grades. The better skills you have in memorizing, the better grades you get, the more advanced you get. So are we failing the generations in preparing them to be lifelong learners? Ignorance sometimes can, if I get a plumber to fix my sink, his ignorance might not be so damaging because he can just fix it wrong. And then I can call another one and he can fix it correctly. However, there are critical professions. Like if I go to a physician, enterologist, hepatologist, whatever, nephrologist, if that professional, if that physician is ignorant about some of his subject, is ignorant about what is the update, what is new in his subject area, then I'm in trouble. That can be, it could be a lethal outcome. So how are we flipping the coin for the ignorance? How are we seeing that we're moving forward with all this advancement in knowledge? How are we preparing? I see us, for example, we have in medical education, the LCME, which is the head of the liaison of medical education in the US. And this is the entity that accredited school put the self-directed learning as one of the specific standards that we have to pass for a school to be accredited. And what that does is like, we have to teach the students how they can learn how to go and seek knowledge, not to memorize, not to be, but at the end of the day, these students are required to sit for steps, to sit for, if they don't, and steps mostly would depend on how much knowledge they memorize, they retained, so they can regurgitate in the exam and pass it and move on with their career. So how well are we doing service for this generation to move forward, for our next generation, for ensuring our health, ensuring our every aspect of life, that we're putting it in the right hands, that are not filled with ignorance, that they are seeking in every moment to look for the correct information, to be educated, to be learning, to be long life learner. And I'll stop here and I'll let Mohamed tackle that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. Sakina. Thank you very much. Fadal Mohamed.
Well, thank you for both questions. So I'll try to cover as much as what I've wrote down. There's a lot in there. But I can see a big problem in both points is maybe the definition of ignorance. Now, because ignorance is a very new field, we kind of align ignorance with stupidity and with secrecy, or with lack of effort in seeking knowledge. And what a large part of this book and this field is sort of ignorance is the same as its twin, which is knowledge, is that it's a very big field. It's a very massive definition. It's sort of an umbrella. Now there is good ignorance and there is bad ignorance, and we are always tackling ignorance. Like for example, was it Dr. Sakina who asked the last question? I don't remember exactly. Was it? Yeah, Dr. Sakina. You mentioned education, for example, in your and I was actually reading Stuart Feinstein, who also does a bit of study on agnotology as well, but he calls it bulimia style education. It's sort of like we eat up the knowledge and regurgitate it out on an exam paper. But what we have to be careful with that is that when we're testing, we're not weeding out but we're rather evaluating, and we're not, for example, unintentionally leaving out the best because of, geneticists have a very good way of explaining this, is that we screen, we get what we screen for. So perhaps that's an idea that we should look at, is testing, and is testing actually evaluating the young generation, or is it weeding out the best? Because not everybody is the same, not everybody learns the same, not everybody is interested in the same things, and perhaps the education system needs another look at. And you're right, in ignorance in professionals, professionalism is, or professions, for example, can be a deadly thing. But that goes to evaluating versus weeding out. And agnotology is a very new field, and from our discussion today, we can see its importance, and the importance of understanding our lack of knowledge, and our lack of and understanding our ignorance. But yeah, thank you very much for your questions.
I think Abdullah has some questions, right? He asked you before, Sakina.
Oh yeah, so Dr. Abdullah's question was mainly down to the definition of agnotology. And like I mentioned, it is an umbrella term for all these different types of ignorance. So ignorance is a lack of knowledge, but it also is unintentional weeding out of certain knowledge for manipulation. But all of these things fall under the term agnotology. And you asked me to explain the graph that I was showing with the how with the postgrad versus the PhD student, and that graph mainly explains how knowledge actually precedes ignorance, not the other way around. So knowledge actually exposes, in some ways, our ignorance, because when we learn about a topic more and more, we learn actually what we don't know about a specific topic. So the two go hand in hand, but rather than the old linear way that we used to think about ignorance, in that ignorance came before knowledge, Professor Proctor argues the opposite way, and so does Stuart Feinstein. But yeah, thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. حنان رفع ايديك، تفضل حنان.
يا شكرا يا نهى. السؤال بتاعي الحقيقة، أنا لما اتكلمت عن when I spoke about looking for information in Google search, I will give example. If I'm looking for a product benefit, or risk, or whatever, you will find contradicting statement in Google search. And there is many examples. And actually, I don't want to say it's paranoia, but it will make you think that people are intentionally trying to mislead because they want to profit from that product. And I started to mistrust the products, the produce. When you go to grocery, looking at the ingredients, looking at the sources, and they say, well, it was planted in so. I started to lose confidence, trust. I don't trust them. And because I'm going to many researches and looking, I found that the FDA food, اللي عايشين في أمريكا كده ذكروني FDA which
Food and Drug Association.
they actually give allowances for those people when they put, for example, sugar 1 gram. It could be 1.5 or 1.9 gram. Sorry? They give them that allowance. That is legal. This is legal. That's actually mentioned in research. So it is a scary fact. And the system in America, right, and maybe in other parts of the world, but being here and see the lobbying for the big corporation to market their products at the expense of people's health, right? So they know that they are trying to impose ignorance intentionally, okay, to make profit. And even the lobby, the political lobby, and you know, elections, all the system is involved in this because people benefiting from each other. The political, the politician will have money to market for himself for election, and they will have allowances and laws which will go pro what they want and what they need, and all come down to profit. And give you example of e-cigarette, what we call vaping. This will be typical to the tobacco companies in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Now e-cigarette is taking the same scenario of fooling people, and of course, this vaping is among the teenager is widely spread. They like it because of the flavor, and it is, I think, charged using a USB. So, but the health consequences is tremendous. Of course, it is new in the market, and maybe they scientists not really covering everything because the cases are sporadic and it's not regular. For example, some people come with convulsions, right, when they smoke a lot of it. So there is documented correlation between e-cigarette and convulsions. And one of the corporate CEO came out and he said it is safe. It's not like smoking cigarette. And actually, the chemicals in the vaping are so harmful to the lung. It can cause something called it's not important now, but it has health sequences, and I'm quite sure the next decade will show a lot more worse. And they will follow the same scenario of trying to manipulate the science and fighting back. The same scenario will happen, and all is down to profiting. So that's one example. Other example, and maybe it is sensitive topic, and I'm not quite sure. I don't have a lot of information about it, but gender education. Gender education, now there is a revolution in schools at very young age, 8 years old, teaching them about gender. This is not just in America, in England as well. And the parents from all backgrounds, all religions, are panicking, literally panicking, and withdrawing their children out of the schools, trying to homeschool them or whatever they do, but they are trying to avoid what's happening in the school. And when you go back to the corporation and people who might benefit, and maybe I'm missing something, maybe Abdullah or somebody who knows more information will tell me and elaborate more about it. But there are pharmaceutical companies, there are doctors who are benefiting from this gender issue because of the medication, because of the operations, because of a lot of stuff being done to those young people. I know it's a very sensitive topic, but it's a problem. It's a huge problem. And I can see here from communities, Sudanese, or they are talking about it and they are withdrawing their children out. So this is another maybe controversy and somehow imposing ignorance. I'm not quite sure on people just to have some sort of financial benefit. Allahu alam. شكرا.
شكرا جزيلا حنان. قبل ما تجاوب يا محمد I'm inviting Abdelbagi.
السلام عليكم.
أهلين ومرحبا.
الحقيقة خطيت السؤال في الشات لمحمد. بس about in the last few years of COVID, I think agnotology is the main theme of the war against between America and China on COVID. Say, for example, America blame, or Donald Trump in particular, blame China on hiding information or misleading the whole universe about the facts on COVID. And moreover, it's also, for the first time, we start even to question the scientific, very scientific, good journals like Science, for example, when it leaks some research on COVID, which is proved to be somehow manipulated. Do you have any idea about that, Mohammed?
شكرا عبدالباقي. شكرا لك. تفضل يا محمد.
Okay, so a lot to cover there. I'm actually running short for time, but I'll try my best to cover both points as briefly as I can. But what I found the most interesting was Dr. Hanan's point on misinformation, and she drew a very interesting comparison between electronic cigarettes now and the early 40s cigarette marketing, which I can see actually a very interesting comparison, because I can see the same patterns now as there was back in the 1950s. So that's a very interesting point, and it goes down to like the book mentions, it's the delay in research leading to the thrive of the market. So for example, right now a big part of the research and the marketing around vaping is this sort of uncertainty and this intentional uncertainty around vaping research, and that perhaps explains a big part of why this industry continues to grow. But thankfully, I can see that here in the UK at least, the Prime Minister was pressured enough to ban completely disposable cigarettes, and perhaps the US could look at doing the same. But yeah, thank you. That's an interesting point. As far as agnotology and COVID was an interesting time with ignorance, and I believe a big part of what this book doesn't really cover too much is the role of fear on ignorance. And when there wasn't too much known about COVID at the time, and that went hand in hand with sensationalism, it was very easy to control information and to control the masses. And perhaps that played a big part in geopolitics between the US and China. But it was a perfect storm of fear of the masses, sensationalism, unregulated news, and also you know, the characters that we had in office at the time. So that perhaps explains the growth of ignorance around the topic at the time. But yeah, it's an interesting point.
ما في حد رافع يده واتوقع الليل عند الجهة الثانية من العالم، وأكيد برضو الوقت يتأخر عندك يا محمد. Let me thank you so much, Mohammed, for taking the time and the effort to present this valuable book at our book club. Really, we enjoyed your insights and perspective were truly valuable, and we were all of us, we were thoroughly engaged at your presentation. It was a pleasure to have you in our 81 book club, and I hope you enjoyed the experience as we did. And really, we are looking forward to see you again and to hearing you to speak to us in another challenging book. Thank you very much, Mohammed. Thank you, really, thank you very much.
No, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and you know, hopefully I get to participate in the future. I find this a very interesting group, and I found it a very interesting topic as well to read into.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me on, and
And
hopefully.
looking forward